Budzinski, and I'm the Assistant Department Chair of the Human Services Department. And I'm here today with Amy Hall, who is an adjunct faculty member in our undergraduate department. And she is going to share with everyone a little bit about what she does in her full-time work. So Amy, if you don't mind, would you just talk to us a little bit about what you do full-time?
Sure. Thanks, Jesse. Thank you for the opportunity. So I am the district administrator for a Guardian at Litem program here in North Carolina, specifically District 20, which serves Robeson County. And in that capacity, I have the ability to work with trained volunteers to advocate for abused, neglected, and dependent children in the juvenile court system. And those children come into care once the petition is filed through the Department of Social Services. So these children, unlike juvenile delinquents, are coming into the care and custody of the Department of Social Services due to no fault of their own.
Okay. And what is your educational background? What degree do you have that allowed you to do this work?
So I'd like to say that maybe I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. And so I started with an associate's degree. We're not going to talk about years. So initially, I started with an associate's degree in health information management and knew that I had a passion, but that wasn't quite it. And from there, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology, a master's in child law and policy, and am finalizing my PhD in human services. So I think it was a combination that got me to where I am today.
Yes, I love that. What are some of your main responsibilities at your position?
So in my role, I have the privilege of working with a team of Guardian ad litem supervisors and volunteers. And so the program design is intended to be one volunteer child advocate to one child or one sibling group. And that volunteer would go through extensive training and interviewing and screening and then take on the service to represent that child's best interests paired with a Guardian ad litem attorney advocate. In our district, we are in great need for volunteer advocates. And so when there is no advocate, a child, of course, cannot have or go to court without representation or advocacy. So as a staff, we take on that role and we serve in what we call an unassigned child advocacy case. And so our role would then be, so I make visits with the child at least monthly, quarterly if they're in a permanent placement that is trying to close out like adoption. And so a typical day or a typical week would consist of visiting children, making contacts, ensuring that their needs are met, following up with, sometimes it's therapists, sometimes it's school teachers, sometimes it's the family members, it's the foster parent, it's the grandparent, whoever the parties may be that are involved. And then we write and prepare a report using a template that's been designed by the state. And that is then communicated to the judge. And so it looks at issues for the court's attention, recommendations for resolution for any of those issues. And then, of course, the main focus is on permanency. How do we find permanency for that child? I'm also responsible for recruitment and retention so that we can try to recruit adequate numbers of volunteers and then, of course, train them using the national CASA curriculum once we've identified those individuals.
Okay. You're busy.
Yes. We go to court 2 to 3 times a week. It's usually every Wednesday, every Thursday. We serve currently have about 406 children on our caseload.
Wow.
We average about 45 new children every month. And in the course of a year, we serve between 700 and 800 children because, as you can imagine, children come and go and exit the system.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe you've kind of answered this, but what is the most challenging part of your work?
Oh my goodness. The most challenging, I would say, is number one, we live in an impoverished community. And so poverty definitely plays a factor. And I think that the second biggest factor is the substance use. The opioid epidemic has had a profound impact on the children and families that we serve. And I would say 95% of all the children that we serve has an allegation that relates to substance use that has impacted or brought this family into care. A large majority of the children on my caseload are infants who are born substance affected, and thus come into care at that point. If substance isn't the main reason they come into care, it is certainly a party to that once we get to know the facts of the case. And so it really has made it a complex situation.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you enjoy the most about your work?
Uh, I love the interaction with the children. Children are my passion. But I can't say that that's always a positive interaction. Sometimes it will pull at your heartstrings and you just want to make it right for them. But what I love the most is the ability to impact a life. And I love when families are reunified and children get to go home. Or when children, unfortunately, they're not always reunified with their parents, but when they find their forever home and an adoption is complete, and I know that that child will be taken care of for the remainder of their life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. What do you wish that you had known when you first started this work that you know now?
Oh my goodness. I wish I had understood or had more training in trauma and being trauma aware, trauma informed, and then of course burnout and secondary trauma. I think those are the things that impact us. I, I think that we think, okay, I've got this, or I can handle this. And I don't
Yeah.
think you realize until it begins to kind of pile up inside your mind, oh, I'm carrying this around, and it gets heavy sometimes. And to know what to do and what the resources are, and that it's okay. I mean, I think that's the human service professional in us, is that, you know, we don't mind being involved, we don't mind helping. But I did not know that I was going to carry some of that around with me and that it was going to weigh. And so I tell my students all the time, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not do something about it. And so as a
Right.
human service professional, it's important for us that sometimes we need to step back and we may need to talk through or just debrief a case. I will say that a child death is never easy, and that's something that I was certainly not prepared for.
Right. Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think those are all things too that we've started to, not started to, but we continue to add into the courses when we revise them, because it's so important to constantly have that focus on trauma informed care, self care, secondary
Yes.
trauma. All of that is just so important. What about advice? If you had to offer a student some advice about working in this field?
Um, So I really thought about that. And I would say that you have to have a passion for people. The
Mhm.
first, I think that comes natural, or we wouldn't be pursuing this field to start with. But I think it's important as a human service professional that we understand bias and that we can identify our own bias. When I first started my work in abuse, neglect, and dependency, I thought, well, I don't have any bias. And we train our volunteers to recognize bias. And I remember thinking, I don't have any bias. Until it hits you in the face one day. And when you say bias, people think, oh, that means that I'm negative in some way. But there are things that I think naturally they hurt us. So for me, my bias is children who have been sexually abused. I
Mm,
know that it evokes this raw sense of, oh, how can this parent do this? They were supposed to protect their child, or whoever the perpetrator is. And so
mhm.
I've learned that those are the cases that I sometimes cannot emotionally separate myself from, and that I might not be the best person to advocate for that child because I might lose my objectivity and in the best interest of that child because I'm so focused on what somebody did or did not do for this child. And we train our volunteers for that, and our staff, that it's okay if you know that, and understanding that some of our volunteers may have experienced trauma, and knowing that if you've been exposed to trauma in your own life as a professional, none of us are um, exempt from that. Understanding that you may be triggered, domestic violence or a child death or something along those lines could impact you, and knowing the resources. And so that's my advice is, always have a mentor. I think a peer mentor is a wonderful thing at any stage, whether you are a new human services professional or whether you consider yourself a seasoned human services professional.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. So I do want to circle back to, you've mentioned volunteers several times, and I know our students are often looking for ideas or ways that they can get some experience and volunteer in their communities. So could you
Yes.
just talk for a minute about how students could potentially get involved, like in an organization that you work for?
Sure. The Guardian Ad Litem program in North Carolina exists in all 100 of our counties, and then it's throughout the nation. It exists in typically some form. It may be known as CASA or Court Appointed Special Advocates. Um, and so there is an opportunity in almost every state for our students to get involved. Most programs are designed differently. In North Carolina, the way it works is that you would complete an application, you would go through an interview, an extensive screening, background, criminal check, that kind of thing. And following the interview, if you were accepted into the program, you would then complete a 30-hour pre-service training. We often have the opportunity to work with students in our community who complete their internship hours, and they come to us as freshmen and sign up to be a volunteer. They complete the training, and then as they get closer to their senior year, they are prepared in a capacity that they could serve as a volunteer first and then their internship. And what we find is that many come back to us for their graduate work as well to complete their internships. But it is a great opportunity to give back. It's probably one of the most rewarding career opportunities I've ever been afforded. And I hear the same from many of our volunteers as well.
That's awesome. And I actually think we might have a link that will allow students to look to see where the closest CASA program is to them based on where they live. And so I'll put that in the comments for the video so that if anybody's watching this and is interested in volunteering or getting involved, that they can look to see how to do that.
That'll be
So
great.
thank you, Amy, so much. I'm sure that this will be so helpful to so many students who are watching this. Is there anything else that you want to add or share?
I would say that a piece of advice that my mentor gave me, and if you've ever been a student in one of my classes, I say this probably ad nauseum, but I really try to leave that impact. And it is that when you think about really any of the roles that we have in human service, in the human service field, it can all be overwhelming to families and to us, and we want to fix it all. And that's not realistic sometimes because families come to us with complex situations, and sometimes we just don't have resources available to help those families. And so I had a mentor who once shared with me that I would never be able to fix everything that was going on in a family or a child's life, but that I could have the charge of making it better than I found it. And so that's probably what I would like to leave. And I try to impart to my students is, life can be overwhelming for us and for our families and children that we serve. But if we make it our priority to make it better than we found it, then we've at least not created barriers for those families at that point.
I love that. That's a great way to end this video. I really appreciate your time, Amy.
Thank you, Jessie.